Thank you for tuning into the Collecting Real Estate podcast. We focus on learning and teaching based on our guests' journeys operating their real estate investments and providing investment knowledge to passive investors so they can comfortably invest in multifamily real estate. Welcome, everybody, to the Collecting Real Estate podcast. I have two very, very special guests today. We've been working together for well over a month now, and they have been nothing but super impressive to me. This is Colin Young and Madi Bedoeva, and I'd love for them to explain where they are in their real estate journey, and then we're going to talk about our relationship and what we've got going on right now.
Awesome. Yeah, well, Bill, thanks for having us on. We're very excited to be on the podcast and also excited for working with you and where that'll take us. I guess we'll just start with my background, and Maddie can explain her background, but I always, growing up, I had an affinity for building things. I used to make Adirondack chairs and build sheds. And so I always had an interest in creating and buildings and physical things. I went to school in Boston for construction management. And so that's kind of my professional background. Got a bachelor's in construction management, stayed out in Boston for a couple of years and had the opportunity to work on some really cool commercial construction projects for mixed-use buildings to the Logan Airport, terminal construction, just all kinds of really cool stuff. And around 2017, I moved back to the Albany area. I worked for BDL Construction here and continued working on commercial, large multifamily construction projects in the Albany area, Schenectady, Troy, and I knew that I wanted to be on the other side of it. I wanted to be the owner. We were always working with the owners, and they had this vision for what they were trying to build. And I knew I wanted to get into real estate, and it would take a while, but I wanted to be the one, even if it was on a small scale, to be making those creative decisions and working with contractors and being behind it. And so I left the construction management realm in May of 2020, so right at the heart of the pandemic, and got licensed as a licensed real estate salesperson, did some real estate sales, and began the journey of building our investment business. And so we started out with kind of a house hack, live-in flip, and worked our way up to doing just dedicated flips, and we've done a couple. And our ultimate goal is to get into the larger multifamily investment. And so we're kind of in the capital building phase right now and building relationships. And Maddie has a background that complements that very well with the property management for the state. So if you wanted to.
Fantastic. No, that's great. Just let me sum that up. So Colin has been away from his W-2 for 3 years, got right into real estate sales and focusing on real estate investment. Maddie, what's your perspective on where you are?
So I went to school for criminal justice. I never finished school, but I only have a year left, so I can always finish it if I'd like to. But most recently I worked for Department of Labor, and I did property management for them. We oversaw 92 sites across the whole state, so I was working very closely with our property managers, and customer service, working with vendors, a little bit of everything. So I left my job, I want to say 6 months ago, because, I saw the opportunity that we had, and it was kind of a little bit too much of working for full-time for Department of Labor and then also, building our own business. So don't regret it at all. It's been, the best 6 months of my life. Yeah.
Cool. I have to ask you, being in the Department of Labor, handling the property management department, tell us what's your perspective from what you've dealt with from that position based on dealing with property managers?
It's so the state itself is, very different from private sector. There's a lot of layers that you have to get permission from. So it's not just, working directly with the property managers. It was, working with the property managers, but then getting approval from all these other layers. But it was, I think that was one of the reasons why I was very interested in this position that we're currently working with you. And it's been awesome.
Well, that's great. No, I appreciate that. And one more follow-up before I shoot it back to Colin. Explain briefly some differences or one big takeaway from working with the state on that level to working with me for the last month and a half, 2 months. Is there any differences there?
There absolutely are.
I almost want to jump in myself, but yeah,
I'm getting ready for this. Hopefully it's good.
Honestly, there was no systems. So like myself and my boss, we were both new to the position, and we kind of had to come up with the systems because the previous director didn't really have those. So, coming from the state to here and having all the systems that you've created over the years have been, kind of mind-boggling because refreshing. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, this makes sense. I can just look at it. It'll take me a day to, review everything, and I can just go from there instead of trying to create my own systems from scratch. So I think that was the biggest difference. And also the layers of approval as well.
Yeah, now you only have one layer, which is me. Maybe that's second. Who am I kidding? Maybe that's second layer because we've got a couple partners on a 60-unit townhouse complex that you're managing, and the 16-unit also. Colin, question for you. Coming from a large general contractor, BBL is one of the largest general contractors in the Albany area. You handle some construction management for them. And part of what you're helping us with is remodeling townhouses as apartments turn over on that 60 unit. Explain some differences that you've witnessed in this short period of time dealing with a large general contractor to something that we are dealing with on the 60 unit and even that 16 unit.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, there's more similarities than there are differences. A lot of the same general idea of how to go about starting a project and taking it to completion between schedule, budget, systematizing the material procurement, all of those items are all very similar. It's just a difference of scale. And so I'd say one of the biggest differences between my experience doing the construction management on a larger scale is the type of contractors that you have on the job, and not you specifically, but in the commercial space versus the more residential space. And this is true, too, with us doing our own redevelopment projects on single-family homes. I had a whole portfolio of contractors that would, by trade, that would work on these large projects, but I had nobody on the residential side. And so that was a learning curve for me in building relationships, kind of starting from scratch with some of these smaller guys, and they operate totally differently. They don't have the same size crews that they can just be sending back and forth to different jobs. It's usually a smaller crew, and to me, it's more important to find good people in that environment. I think on a bigger scale, the not so good people just don't make it, and I think on the smaller scale, you have to weed that out a little bit more. But yeah, like I said, a lot of the concepts and the systems are very similar. It's just a matter of scale. What I've enjoyed working with you on the 60 unit and the 16 is that we also have the ability to kind of pivot if we need to quicker than working for a large company that's already got a lot of these systems in place. It's much more, you have to fit within a box. The assistant project manager does X, Y, Z, doesn't touch this, and so only as you move up can you start to get into some of the more upper level decision-making processes. And on this scale, it's a team. We're all figuring it out as we go, how to make the systems better, how to do it better next time. And so that's another big difference that I'm enjoying very much here, is that there's more freedom to get involved on that upper level.
Yeah, and the way I explain it to many over the years, it's a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, season-to-season, and then getting to that annual measurement of how did we do this year. And Madi and Colin have taken my systems. I created a operations manual that I built over a 10 or 12 year period of time, along with a few other things that tie into the property management software, a property or project management software that we're able to focus on a daily, weekly basis, which is task project oriented. They've been able to take all these systems to a whole nother level. So it is a very nice complementary relationship, basically taking us from one spot to the next, which I'm super excited about. Let's dive right into that property management and asset management. When I was moving along through my career for 25 years, it was all property management. I was the property manager, and I guess I was the asset manager also, and I didn't even know what an asset manager was. So I learned about asset management back in 2019, and now realizing the importance of asset management when the team is built and there's more people involved in the management of these complexes. Madi, what is your perspective from your position as a property manager and dealing with me as the asset manager?
It's awesome. It's been very great working with you, and knowing how much knowledge you have, and like all of your experience. It's been, I'm very thankful and very grateful that I have a mentor like you to go based off.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. Colin, what is your perspective from the differences between the property manager and the asset manager?
To me, and again, as we grow our relationship here, I'm starting to see the difference here. You having worked so long in the property management and been in the day-to-day, again, you've created a lot of these systems that allows us to implement them very quickly. And so I guess the difference is, yes, we're involved in the day-to-day when it comes to work orders and delinquencies and things like that. But we've been able to get that very efficient and use the systems that you've created so far to get it to a point where we're able to summarize the different items. Like, Bill, here's what's going on with our collections. We need to address these couple of things, but everything's going well. Here's how the work orders are going. And so that allows you to be in a position where you're getting the information in a nice, compact, summarized way. So you can focus more on, okay, how directing the ship as the asset manager and saying, okay, we got this kind of a retention rate, like we had this discussion last week. We're sending out renewals through the end of June, and we got a certain number of almost 100% retention rate. So then that's where we report that back to you, and you're able to figure out, okay, does that mean we need to make an adjustment to increase maybe the rental renewals moving forward because we're under market value? And so I guess from what I'm starting to learn and see is our job is obviously to keep the ship running, but also to be able to kind of distill the most important KPIs, I guess it would be, key performance indicators for you to then look at and review and make the kind of executive decisions with the knowledge that you have. Maybe we need to adjust something here. Maybe we need to, look at what we're doing for renewals or for the current units that are open to get them filled. And so that's what, from our perspective, that's how we see it in our value, to you and the other partners, is to be able to kind of summarize those key indicators.
Yes, thank you for that. It makes me anxious to get to our Friday meeting so we can regroup from the activities of this week based on what we talked about last Friday and what we had to plan for to keep this ball rolling and to make that progress. So this week we'll be able to update each other and see how we're doing. I want to get into the relationship between, it's a little bit different. When I was looking for a property manager for this 60 unit, we were considering going third party. I went for third party on another 100 units we have locally. And then we ultimately decided to take property management in-house, vertically integrate, and to have the control so we could be as efficient as we possibly can based on mine and my brother's experience in this business. And I started making some calls because I went on Indeed. I got a lot of, similar resumes, people who were property managers at apartment complexes. So it feels like I had 6 or 7 people that were very similar, and they had been in a business 15, 20 years. And I'm sure we could have worked something out, but I wasn't excited to bring someone like that on. And I started reaching out through the inner circle that I've been involved with over the last 2 or 3 years. We had known each other for the past 1.5, 2 years, had some very interesting discussions, very fruitful discussions that were able to, keep our relationship going on a 3 or 4 month basis. And you were one of 2 or 3 people I called, and the reaction was interesting because the timing was right. I could tell in the first 5 minutes where I'm like, oh boy, yes, I think I'm on to something here. But you had you two had an interesting proposal for us. I was looking for, in my mind, one person to help us. It was 76 units. Tell us about how that all happened and your proposal and how it ended up being a 2-person position.
Yeah, well, it was kind of interesting how it all worked out, and we have a good friend of ours who's later in life, and we sat down with him recently and had lunch with him, and he said, when you're ready for something, it'll happen. The universe, the world, it'll come into play, and so we just happened to be at a position where we're building this investment business for ourselves. But it's a huge difference. You had somebody on the podcast recently who's I think it was a recovering electrical engineer or something to that degree. And I feel like Maddie and I are kind of like, that really resonated with me because I'm a recovering construction project manager, and Maddie's recovering, because it does take a while to get out of that 9-to-5 mindset. But one of the things that is nice about having the W-2 is that consistent income. And we started to see that this kind of sales income, commission-based, we sell a property here and then we don't have that income for a little while. It was actually impeding our ability to progress, for financing purposes and all of that. And we said, okay, we need to have something that's going to be in the realm of real estate where we can work in an environment where we can learn, that works for our business, where we can add value, but that's a little bit more consistent. And so we're like, okay, what's that going to be? And 24 hours later, my phone's ringing, Bill Hamill. And I was like, that's interesting. And we had a front discussion. And it just, right from the beginning, we knew it was a good fit. And we just had to work out some of the details as to what that would actually look like. And so we put together a proposal for you and the other partners as to what we saw our value being. And So obviously it worked out. We're working with you, but I think the biggest difference between what we wanted to deliver and maybe what somebody else who's just only done property management for the last XYZ years is we kind of want to come into it from an entrepreneurial mindset where we're not necessarily just going to come in and make some phone calls, lease some apartments, work with the maintenance team. We wanted to do it as part of this larger picture and the goals that you guys have for the buildings and the complexes, the greater repositioning, of the buildings. We wanted to come into it from a perspective where we're connected with that higher level, not just we're here to do property management. We're here to do property management so that this building ends up being worth considerably more because it's in the process of being repositioned, and we're adding a little bit more value. But it's a team thing for her and I. We're a team on our personal investment business, and we're like, it has to be a team for this, so that it's not one of us is doing the business and one of us is working in property management. So it's worked out great though, because we can be in two places at once.
Yeah, let me give the backstory on where we are with that 60 unit. We bought it in late 2021. This is a classic value add, massive, I love to say massive rent growth deal because that's what it's turned out to be. But, the value add, is moderate, if not a bit more. So that's where your construction management does come in very, very well. We turned 20 apartments out of the 60 units in year one. And we did a lot of the value add on the exterior and apartment remodels. And it went as planned. So it was a great first year. So the way that Colin, Maddie, and I discussed it before we started this position was we're going to repeat year one in year two. And I was able to have much more clarity based on what I experienced in year one. So I know, I don't want to say exactly, but I have a pretty good idea of where we want to be in year two. And I'll worry about year three when the time comes. But Maddie, explain how you and Colin are complementing each other, where you have certain roles and he has certain roles.
Yeah, so my role is at this point, my biggest role is to do leasing. So obviously we list the apartments. I do the showings, and let's say there is a maintenance emergency at one of the other sites, and so I'm able to concentrate on the showings, give the people the customer service that they deserve, whereas tenants deserve customer service as well. That's where Colin comes into play and goes and addresses that maintenance concern.
Excellent.
So
go ahead. Sorry.
It would be. Yeah, so, us being a team, me concentrating on one thing and him killing two birds with one stone, I guess.
Absolutely. Colin, get into detail on what your focus is.
My focus is, the way I've been kind of seeing it in my mind is it's the physical asset, the maintenance that needs to get done to it, the items that we're doing on the turnovers that are adding value, those capital improvements. So we're to the point now where, because the leasing does take quite a bit of time, it's a lot of finesse with scheduling people to see the units. And so having Maddie be able to focus on that is allowing me to focus on putting together rock solid turnover, using the systems and the scope of work that you've already created, and then just being able to bring my creativity into it to refine it as much as possible. And so that's freed me up to be able to focus on the maintenance guys, keeping them busy, keeping them doing the activities that are going to continue, like you had mentioned, the exterior improvements, keep them busy before we start getting into the inside turnovers as we go into May, June, July, August, when that gets heavy. And so I've been able to focus on that and how do we get the materials in? And, we walked through Home Depot and got all the SKUs the other day. And so those are the upfront items that are going to allow us to deliver an expectable and repeatable turnover moving in the future. So that's allowed me to focus on that.
Let's talk about the service a little bit. For so many years, I managed about 45 buildings, totaling close to 250 apartments. And when people have service order, work orders, whatever you want to call them, you want to, in my early days, I wasn't focused on it at all. I wasn't professional. I just wanted to be very highly occupied and keep the collections going. And then it just reached a point where, I have to be a professional in this business if I'm going to continue. And I think that's just, it was a maturity thing for me. And it was challenging on the service end because, it's easy to stay super busy, always needing maintenance technicians, quality maintenance technicians, so we can deliver competently. And when you get super busy and when it rains, it pours with a lot of service items, it's hard to provide the service as fast as you'd like in a quality manner. Explain what we're trying to accomplish on the two complexes as far as general service, communications, and that stuff.
Yeah, I think really to start that off, it's answering the phone, being able to get back to somebody or answer when they have a question or concern. And I guess the general idea is a work order comes in. We, as the managers, coordinate with the tenant. Okay, we've received it. We see that there's a concern or a problem that needs to be addressed. We're working on it. We schedule with them when maintenance can get into the unit so they know what to expect. Then the work gets done. We follow up with them after and make sure that, hey, just making sure everything's good with that. We'll close it out. So there's kind of a full circle where we're involved on the front end and the back end. And then that way things aren't just out there in the ether for a while. Or do we take care of this? Do we take care of that? So that's kind of the cycle of it. But definitely having on these larger buildings, having a full-time maintenance tech is amazing. It's terrific because he's there to get in and address things quickly. So I guess the name of the game is address things quickly and efficiently and make sure that the tenant is getting that level of customer service where, hey, somebody's actually answering the call. Somebody's actually answering this maintenance item. And then another big part of that is utilizing systems like Buildium to kind of get the tenants using that system so we can track the items, we can follow up instead of texts or phone calls or things that can easily get away from us. So that's been another big item is encouraging the residents like this will help us help you faster. If you put those work orders in through the tenant portal. And I think that's been, people love that because they feel like, they're describing what they need. We're on it. We're calling them. We're following up. They're getting a higher level of service.
Yes. And I operated, I've been doing this for quite a while. So I tend to be wired to be a little bit old school in a lot of ways. And I was a hands-on manager, which it's good and bad. To being so intimate on the day-to-day, I think I ran things pretty well, but at the same time, I was devoured by the business, so it has some negative points there. And this Asana project management system has helped me dramatically since I started using that because throughout my career and having a staff for probably close to the last 20 years, we didn't utilize something like that. It was more of emails and a weekly meeting and then just general communication throughout the week. But I had a problem where I felt like a lot of items, big and mostly small, tedious stuff, would go open-ended. And we would find out open-ended items usually by tenants 2-3 weeks after, where they call back into the office and what happened here? How did this not get closed up? Now the tenant's frustrated. Asana, I feel, has really closed that gap where anything that comes to mind, anything that we talk about, we're able to establish that task that we're all interactive on, we all share. And I feel like we're not missing a detail. Maddie, what do you think?
I think Asana is great. You can put any task on Asana, and it's something that we know that we need to address. And once the task has been addressed, we can add a comment to that task. And it's been a great way of keeping track of everything. And like you said, nothing is being missed. Everything has been touched on. And I think it's a great software to utilize.
Communicate in real time.
In real time, yeah.
No, absolutely. We're able to assign somebody a task with a deadline, and ultimately it just turns into an email notification to whoever is assigned to that task, and we're able to close things out accordingly, or at least make a plan, put a different time deadline on there, and when we address it at that point. So it might be things that we have to continually work on, but we don't lose sight of it. Nothing goes open-ended, which I think in this business is a major problem. Not speaking for other managers, but it's fair to say that goes on quite a bit in this business. I want to shift away to, because a lot of these systems make it so, wow, this job is easy. Things come in and we just knock stuff out. We call the maintenance tech and we just organize things with the tenants. What's so hard about this? And then we've had discussions where we've had a few tenants where we have to give them non-renewals, or we sent them a renewal and then they respond back and it turns into a somewhat of a negotiation, whether it be, hey, I want this done if you're going to raise my rent, stuff like that. Tell us about a few examples before we end this on a few of those tenants that, in my experience, especially early on, certain interactions and phone calls I wasn't really excited to make.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's those systems, Asana, Buildium, they help out tremendously, but with property management in the rental business, there's always the human element. And because there's always going to be that human element, there's always needs to be, that's something that's not just black and white. That's not something that a system can just, make a determination. So there's the nuances in between that brings up. And the first one that comes to mind is a tenant that did work to the unit under previous ownership, right? So they didn't have the level of customer service or, maintenance intervention that they wanted. So they started to do work themselves, painting cabinets, put some floor in. And these are all items that were already done. And it looks nice. It's a nice finished product. They're immaculate. And the question arose during renewals. They felt that they didn't want to necessarily go up the $100 increase on the renewal because of all the work they did. And, it's an honest, valid thing to bring up. But that's where having the management be able to go in and make a nuanced decision from our perspective. Most of the work that was done, granted, it looked nice, but it's all things that we would end up having to replace anyway on a turnover. So how much actual value, on our end is that worth? Is that worth, and they had asked to be locked in, to a lower rate for the foreseeable future, not just this, so how much is that really worth? And so that's one of those items that we had to really figure out how we wanted to address that and set the precedence up front. Like, okay, this came up. This is the first time, that I'm aware of since the new ownership. And do we allow that? Is that something that we move the line a little bit? And the determination was that we wouldn't move that line because the tenants do talk. We were already getting, people asking us questions based off of conversations. So, is that something that we want to become the new precedent? And the answer to that was no. But that's one of those nuanced decisions.
Because if you do for one tenant and then that tenant, says, hey, guess what? This is what the landlord did for me. Now the other tenant thinks that it's okay to negotiate prices.
Or, hey,
prices.
I upgraded the microwave 6 years ago. Does that count for $25? You start to just open up that whole can of worms. And so that was one of the first items that came up. And then, of course, in addition to that, I feel like no matter what, you're always going to have a tenant or two that just doesn't want to play by the rules. And so we're kind of going through that. Again, nothing terrible, but just that pushing the boundaries a little bit, moving a tenant in that we weren't aware of, right? And so now it's kind of this question of they want to apply because we're looking at them. We issued a non-renewal. This subtenant that we weren't aware of wants to stay. Is that something that we want to allow given how that relationship started? And so, yeah, it's you're following a fine line. You don't want to be too hard and then have somebody say, okay, well, screw you. I'm just going to stop paying and I'm going to hold over in the unit. But at the same time, you don't want to just be, pushover and allow them to do things because they're going to keep pushing that boundary. And so that's another item that came up that, we hadn't experienced before. And we're getting a good psychology, we're starting to learn quite a bit about human nature, how to approach certain situations, so it's more nuanced than just the systems tell us to do X, Y, it's you need to have those moments where you're putting more thought in.
Yeah, that one was fun where we met over there in the first couple weeks as we were, doing an orientation, whatever you want to call it, getting you versed in some of the issues that were going on. And we visited that apartment, and we already got the heads up from our head maintenance tech that our tenant bought a house, but they had already moved in somebody else that wanted to stay there. But the funny thing was, I had already not renewed their lease because they were not complying for the last previous year. So when I brought you over there, discussing, saying, you moved someone else in? I didn't even renew your lease. So how is this gonna work? This doesn't make much sense. But not the first, not the last when we're dealing with a tenant with an issue like this that in our perspective doesn't make much sense. So I'm curious on where we are with that on Friday. Otherwise, what else do you guys want to add? We'll wrap this up because we're getting up close to 40 minutes, right around that spot that we like to keep these. Maddie, do you want to add anything in on what's our vision here for the next month or two or throughout this busy season?
Our vision is to take the already systems in place and systematize everything else as much as possible. So, there is a schedule. This day is for delinquencies, and dedicate that day for delinquencies. Come up with those systems and say, this is it. So systems and
Rhythms.
Rhythms. I also want to say customer service to let tenants know that we do hear them. We do want to address their concerns and issues and just follow up with them and make them heard.
It's a two-way street. Yes, we're coming in here. A lot of these people have lived there for years. They had very inexpensive rent and nicely laid out townhouses in an A location of Latham, New York. And we bought the property for a 2021 price tag. And as many investors know, that's not necessarily very cheap, but we had that value add component. But we came in and we're raising rents pretty good. And I certainly know it clearly that it's a two-way street. We have to give the tenant the service that they deserve. They have to be comfortable where they're living if, we're going to be asking them to pay market rent. Colin, do you have anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
Not a whole lot. I would just say that the what I've been learning over the last month and a half now working with you is that I didn't realize before is the property management, especially while you're in the process of doing a value add. It's a dance. It really is. There's a lot of different factors to keep in mind, and that's something that is becoming apparent to me. Aspiring to get into some value add deals in the future is. There's a lot of little nuanced factors that go into that on how much you're spending on the turnovers, how much retention do you have versus people leaving, and so keeping that flow, that workflow going consistently. It's a lot of different moving parts, and that's I think what makes it kind of it's an art to a degree. There's a level of mastery to it. And it takes experience to do that. So we're just grateful to be able to get some of that off of you as we're learning to do this business better and better.
Yes, thank you. And the way I discussed it back in December, January, I did some material on it being rent roll season. We stare at that rent roll. We see the lease expirations, how those turnovers may come about at what volume, which if we have a lot of turnovers one month, that means we're going to be really, really busy one month. So our goal is going forward in a perfect world, which the world is far from perfect, where we're able to have one, maybe two tenants move out each month as the year goes on. So we're able to utilize our resources month by month. So we're able to do all of this workflow seamlessly as we're still able to give the tenants that proper service. Last year, the end of May got super busy where we had to bring in a subcontractor, and then we were able to catch up a bit. At the end of August, another big turnover, and we had 5 or 6 apartments turnover, which we had to really try to play catch up for the next 2 or 3 months. So that's what I've learned at this property. So what we've been talking about, amongst a lot of other things, is how are we able to make it much more efficient this year from what we learned on the first year?
Predictable, yeah. Predictable and efficient. And it's been great to learn that and get into that.
Awesome. Well, it's great having you guys on. I look forward to continuing to work with you and our Friday asset management, property management meeting.
Yep.
Thanks for being on.
We'll have a lot to report to you. Thanks,
All
Bill.
right.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a review and 5-star rating. This would be very helpful to us. It allows us to build momentum in the podcast world.